Welcome to SAMAG. I'm Vivian Skinner and I'm a member of the SAMAG committee. Now, it might be a little bit of a stretch to say that growing old has become fashionable, but there are a few little hints just blowing in the wind that policymakers are starting to recognise the role that the arts can play in helping all of us live a rich and healthy life as we age. Hopefully all of us here tonight will get that chance to grow old. And all of us, I'm sure, want to enjoy ourselves and stay as healthy and happy as possible as we do so. To discuss the role that creative ageing can play here and the opportunities it offers program managers and artists of all ages, SAMAG has brought together a stellar lineup. Leading our discussion right here is Judith Botel, known to many of you from her former senior role at what we now know as Create New South Wales. More recently, she's been running Albany Lane, her own coaching and consultative business for creative leaders. And Judith is also the CEO of Milk Crate Theatre, one of the cleverest and exciting small arts companies in Australia. As well, next to her, we have Georgina Wood, a living, breathing example of an emerging older artist and a very valued member of the Milk Crate team. We have Joanna Maxwell, a great thinker, who has written a lot about the great twin challenges of being older and actually employed. Joanna is these days in charge of the age discrimination team at the Human Rights Commission. And finally, at the end, we have Margaret Marr, a woman who's made an immense contribution to the national cultural landscape. These days, Margaret leads the Australian Centre for Arts and Health and has for many years been a member of the New South Wales Government's Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing. Welcome to everybody here tonight. Over to Julie.
Thanks, Vivian. Okay, thank you everyone for coming tonight. And thanks to Vivian for asking me to chair this panel, which I hope will be a really interesting discussion about a very interesting topic. And I'm not saying that just because I turned 50 this year and tipped into an all new interesting bucket of advertising, actually. You know you're really living when you get telemarketed by the funeral insurance business. Okay, so, what is creative ageing? I found a whole range of definitions online, but the two that I loved the most were, one, it is about amplifying the creative potential of older people, and the other one is disrupting ageing through the arts. So I feel like they sort of come from two different but complementary directions. One is about developing the creative potential of older people and becoming older artists, but also that idea that we can disrupt the ageing process through the arts. And I just think going for a bit of disruption is always a pretty good aim for an artist. But in Australia, we have an interesting quandary because older people have one of the lowest rates of participation in the arts. It's 39% against a national average of 48%, based on some of the stats out of the Australia Council. The risks to low participation include being male, having a household income under $40,000 a year, being of non-English spoken background, having a lower level of education, and experiencing illness or disability. However, cultural and creativity has also been identified by Ageing UK as one of the most useful and most valuable contributions to your well-being when you are over 70. It's well in front of a range of other contributing measures that puts, having involvement within a cultural creative activity up the top, and having children way down below. So it's interesting that in Australia, while however, the level of participation is low, and so what are the barriers that are standing in front of people participating either at a professional level or in a non-professional level? As CEO of Milk Crate Theatre, so I've been interested in these issues for a while with all my different hats on, but as CEO at Milk Crate Theatre, I had a growing interest. I took over about 2 years ago, let's say two, to make our programs as accessible as possible to our participants who have a diverse range of support needs. For those of you that don't know, Milk Crate Theatre works with people who've had a lived experience of homelessness or other forms of social disadvantage. When we look at our data, 45% of our participants are over 55 and the average age is 53. The majority are on some form of Centrelink benefits. The majority are men. 91% of our participants identify as having a disability or mental health issues. So all of those things would be rating against people's participation in the arts, yet we have over 200 people already up in the middle of this, to the point middle of this year, we had up to 200 people participating in our programs. And I'm sure we'll hit the 300 mark this year, ching ching. But we've also had people coming for many, many years. I think, Georgina, 4 years?
I joined in 2012.
2012, so 6 years. We've had other people up to 12 years. So there's something working in our programs which is attracting people who otherwise would not be participating in the arts. So we're bucking the trend. We're offering our workshops. How are we working this? Well, we offer our workshops in community centres. We go to where older people access other services, or people who've experienced homelessness are accessing other services, health services, legal services, food services. We provide a variety of art forms. We provide now access and support services. So all of what we are doing is creating an environment where people feel safe to participate. And so we have older people participating regularly in our workshops. And that also then had another challenge for the organisation, because when you've got somebody talented like Georgina who's been working with us for 6 years, she's going to have a higher level of challenge in the program, and she can tell you about that herself. But so that's why we've created the Headway program and the Pathways program, which together form a developing artist program or emerging artist program for older people. And it's unique in Australia. There is nothing else like it. It is something that for people who have the barriers of age, the barriers of income, the barriers of social support and other support needs, this is the program where they can develop as artists. So I'm going to hand over to one of our fantastic Pathways participants, Georgina Wood. Georgina is an actor, a writer and a visual artist living in Sydney, and she recently had a solo art exhibition at the Leichhardt Library. Her highlights with Milk Crate Theatre include performing the lead female role of Pepper in Fearless, for which she wrote the song Home is Where the Heart Is. Fearless is now included in the HSC curriculum. She appeared in the short film Invisibility, which won the Best Micro Documentary at the Social Justice Film Festival in Seattle. She's been involved in 2 creative developments, First Times and Feast, with Branch Nebula collaborating with Milk Crate Theatre. Georgina is passionate about theatre of the oppressed, and she'll probably tell you more about that in her introduction. And she at the moment is working on the development of her own forum theatre work, which will be presented on Friday week, and there's some at Alexandria Town Hall, and there's some flyers about that.
It's at Redfern Town Hall.
Is it at Redfern Town Hall?
Yeah.
Okay, it's at Redfern Town Hall, so don't listen to the CEO because she doesn't know what's going on. But luckily people like Georgina do. Oh, okay. All right, so I'm going to hand over to Georgina now to tell you about her pathway to becoming an emerging artist.
I joined Milk Crate, as I said, in 2012. I'd actually seen Milk Crate Theatre, the CEO at the time, with participants on the Telstra telephone book. And I thought to myself, I'd like to know more about that. But I never, I was at Oslam Learning Centre, and they had a Milk Crate Theatre series on, so a workshop. So I joined, and I've been with them ever since. So, and I'm more than happy to have done that. I actually went to university. I've always been interested in theatre, and I thought I would do study drama part-time. So I did that for 3 years, but I've learnt so much more with Milk Crate Theatre. there's just no comparison between the academic and the real life on the boards. So I'm interested in forum theatre. We had Katie, who came out from New York, and she runs forum there. And we had two-week workshops, and I thought to myself, I'd really like to do this. When the opportunity came up for to do a challenge, something more challenging with Milk Crate, I started Headway, and now I'm on Pathways. And there are a group of 5 of us, and we're all doing different things, and I chose Forum. Forum theatre is where the actors and the audience interact. We present them with a problem or 2 problems, and we encourage the audience to become spectators instead of spectators, and see if they can offer a different solution, a different outcome to whatever's happening. So that's how it works. It's doing it. I know I'm alive. I'm up and down, and it's challenging. But I'm so pleased to have this opportunity, and Milk Crate has done that for me. And as you said, it's not happening anywhere else. So it's a first. It's a very important first. As I said, I think that's where I'm coming from. I hope some of you will come along to the show next Friday. Is it Friday?
Friday the 5th. I've got the date at Redfern Town Hall.
Redfern Town Hall, and you'll. So sorry, I'm a bit nervous now. Normally, I'm quite happy talking, but I've dried up.
Okay. Well, then we'll hand over to Joanna, and we'll come back to you with some questions.
My turn to be nervous.
Yes. Now I'm going to say, so Joanna is now the Director of the Age Discrimination Team at the Australian Human Rights Commission. But Joanna's spent many years working, supporting individuals to navigate what we are now calling, I guess, the 3rd stage of our careers. It's that stage where we used to think about retirement, but now we know we're going to be working a bit longer than perhaps we thought about when we were kids. Joanna is a fascinating woman, and I'm going to tell you a few things that she may not want me to, but anyway, they're in her bios. So when Joanna was a child, she thought she was an alien.
No, not that one.
Yeah. She spent her nights in the backyard looking for the family she didn't think she had. But what she did is meant that through her career, she's kept looking for the place where she could belong. She's founded her own business in her 40s around career change. And this has taken her in many directions, including working with women who have recently arrived in Australia to set up new businesses, working with employers to integrate different generations, working with Ray Martin to talk about this on the radio. She's been a member of the National Seniors New South Wales Policy Committee, and is also now a director of the Sydney Community College. She's a voracious writer, and last year HarperCollins published her book, Rethink Your Career. It's a step-by-step guide to working out this 3rd stage of your career, and I encourage you to have a look at it. So Joanna, I'm interested to hear from your point of view what you think about the challenges and opportunities of this 3rd stage.
I should probably start by saying I have long since realised I am not an alien, and I do actually belong on the planet, and I'm very happy about that. I was interested when Judith was saying creative ageing had 2 meanings for her, because I also thought of 2 meanings or 2 ways of looking at it. And one is definitely being creative as we age, and that resonates for me because of my work with older Australians who are changing career, because we know that to have a meaning or a purpose in life is enormously important for well-being, for mental and physical health, for life satisfaction. But what you might not know is, according to some very serious research, it also adds 7.5 years to your lifespan. And I think being creative is one of the most satisfying and the best ways to add meaning to your life. So I think it's very important from that point of view. But I also think creative ageing for me says getting creative about how we age, both as individuals and as a society. And it's that I want to touch on in my remaining few minutes, to frame this perhaps a little bit more widely so that we can then zero in underneath that. And why is it important that we get creative about how we age? It's because, as I talk about a lot, we are now at a stage where people in their 50s and 60s, perhaps even younger, are on a journey without maps. We're charting new territory at the moment, and that's for a few reasons. One is that we're living longer. So we are living 30 years longer than people did on average 100 years ago. We have added more years to our lifespan in the last century than in all previous millennia combined. That's an extraordinary social shift. And we're at the vanguard of it, so there are no maps for that. At the same time, this is now intersecting with enormous changes in the world of work, in the world of society as well, but work is my particular interest. So work, as everybody here will know, has been disrupted numerous times now. We're talking about careers that didn't exist when we started out, let alone probably 2 years ago. Careers that perhaps some of us did for many, many years that are now dying out. And there's things like the gig economy, technological disruption, enormous things I won't go into in detail because I think we read about them every day. The third thing that's happening at the moment that's perhaps a little bit more subtle but I think is really interesting is psychological research and your own experience will tell you that we become more individual as we age, not more similar. And yet in the papers, in government policy quite often, in assumptions, in all those ads for funeral plans, it's assumed often that people over 50 are all the same, which I think is sort of faintly hysterical as someone who turned 60 this year. Well, not all the same. And what I think that says for creativity is that often as we age, we get braver about our creativity. I would never have had the courage to publish a book, and yet it's non-fiction, not a radical novel, but it's still a creative act. I could never have done that 30 years ago, but you get to the stage where you go, well, if not now, when, you know? So I think these are all really interesting, and what they mean is that the life course looks radically different. So if we think about our public life, traditionally, let's say 100 years ago, 50 years ago, you did all your learning, then you did all your working, and then you retired, which is from a French word about withdrawing from the world. And it was a linear, one-way progression. Learning, working, go away and die, basically. We still have those three elements of public life, but they're more like a triangle now, and you move much more freely between the three of them. So you might do one lot of learning and have a working life. You might then decide to retrain and do something different. You might withdraw from work to raise children or found an artistic practice. You might then come back to work. I interviewed several people for my book who were taking adult gap years. Love that idea. I've never managed to stop working long enough to have one, but one day I will. So what this means is that it's a much more fluid transition between the spheres of life. And this brings fantastic opportunities. It's amazingly exciting. But for many, many of us, it's also truly terrifying. Coming back to that thing, we don't have the maps. And so I think it's really important and a really big challenge for policymakers and for us, those of us who are in our 50s or 60s, as almost the vanguard, like it or not, of this new territory, that we find ways to have those conversations, and hopefully we can talk more about that in the discussion. As someone who now works in ageism at the Human Rights Commission, I need to also say that one of the biggest barriers to this brave new world is ageism, and it's about bloody time that we and others did something about it. So that's all I want to say now, but happy to answer questions too that delve more into tips and strategies and the hows and whys of creating a longer working span. But for now, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much. The third person who's going to speak on our panel is Margaret Ma, who has a fascinating and amazing CV, which, and I think possibly will speak a little bit more from the other angle, where arts is a disruptor into the process of ageing and the process of challenges in our health. Or maybe not. We'll see how that goes. But as I said, Margaret has an amazing CV and has been long committed to lobbying old public servants like myself about the need to engage in conversations around health and arts and ageing in the arts. She's a specialist in the areas of health promotion and prevention campaigns, health and design in hospitals, aged care facilities, mental health services. She's an expert in workplace wellbeing programs and in training for health professionals and artists in health and aged care. She is now a member of the New South Wales Health Infrastructures Arts Advisory Panel. She's a member of the New South Wales Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing. She's been a member of the New South Wales Health and Arts Task Force. She's a distinguished fellow of the Society for the Arts in Healthcare. She's a senior lecturer, Arts, Health and Creative Ageing at UNSW Art and Design. She's a former board member of Arts Mid Coast New South Wales. And she's also been on the International Advisory Board of Health Humanities Network in the UK. She also is the founder of the Hello Koalas Sculpture Project, an environmental campaign to support koala conservation and a cultural tourism initiative for regional New South Wales. And this features a new sculpture, Ranger Riley, and I hope to get a photo of Ranger Riley that we can put on the SAMAG Facebook page before the end of the night.
I can't believe what you've been Googling.
I've been having so much fun.
So before I start, I'd like to thank you for convening this group, and I'd also like to recognise that the chair of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Ageing, Catherine Briner, is with us this evening. I'm going to start with a quotation from one of my mentors, Jean Cohen, who in fact coined the phrase creative ageing. And I met him in Chicago in 2006 at a conference, and the first words he said at his keynote was, "Art is like chocolate for the brain." I fell in love with Jean at that point in time, and he became an immense influence in my life because I'd already decided by that point that I wanted to try and develop arts and health as a field in Australia. That had really taken place around the year 2000 when I connected with people in the UK, and then I connected with people in the US. But it was Jean that actually really inspired me to specifically look at the area of arts and health from an ageing perspective. I've been given a few different points to sort of respond to, and disrupting one's life wasn't necessarily one of them. But the first question I've been asked is why the arts and creativity continues to be important as people age. And I'll go back to Jean Cohen because he's written a couple of excellent books, The Creative Age and The Mature Mind. And he talks about how, as we grow older, our brain changes and the left and the right come together more vitally. And I think that's a very important physical aspect of why creativity is so important as we age. But the other aspect is that I think it's really important to, if you want to remain fit and well, is to feel alive, is to feel playful, is to have a sense of fun, and most importantly is to have a sense, an understanding and appreciation of imagination and curiosity. And that's really what Jean was all about. He was all about, as we get older, to have a sense of mastery and a sense of achievement. And we all know, we can all see that in our own lives and our families' lives, how wonderful it is when people join community choirs, or when people are actively engaged in art or theatre or seeing when people are at end of life. There are so many different ways in which arts activities, art forms can be utilised in this area. So the question, what types of arts involvement is supported at healthy ageing, frankly, all of them. It's all about being creative. It's all about exciting the imagination. How do we develop artists that can provide these types of interventions, build relationships with health and aged care providers? This is just such a key aspect to this area, because the one big issue that we haven't grappled with successfully yet, except for Milk Crate, is developing training for professional artists. I've seen so many arts programs over the years, and people have an unrealistic expectation of change by having a volunteer play a piano in a hospital, or by getting some volunteer to do a photography class or something. It's not that at all. It's absolutely critical that the arts are first and foremost in arts and health and creative ageing. Sometimes they're secondary or even third level. So we must first of all think about the artists that are creating the art and working with other people to create the art. And the second thing is, those artists, just because they're good artists, good musicians, doesn't mean to say that they're going to be effective in engaging participation with people, particularly older people. So there has to be that level of training. It's great that what you're doing, and it's great talking to Danielle Gallotta from the Art Gallery this afternoon as well, and the amount of effort that they're looking at in terms of training artists to be really excellent in delivering and designing these programs. I think the other thing too is that I really want to press is sustainability, because it's tough out there developing programs, getting the funding to keep them going, having that training program, paying artists, which is also one of my catch cries. And sustainability just seems to defeat us time and time again, because programs are developed, people have a great idea, they're very enthusiastic, it runs for 12 months and then it stops because the funding's run out. There's just not enough foresight to prepare. But it's also to the funders themselves to think about, triennial funding as distinct from annual funding, so that people have a chance to develop that program and develop the corporate partnerships and so forth to actually ensure that sustainability. And another great thing about Milk Crate is that they have formed a great partnership with Mervac, and through that partnership it's enabled them to do a number of things, including this training program. So again, that's a great model for us to think about, because we're so often reliant on government funding, when in fact there are so many opportunities for corporate and philanthropic support, as long as you're well aligned. So I guess one of the things the Australia Council has done really well is to have programs to help the arts community develop good strategic relationships with corporate and philanthropic. So I've been given up the wind up, so I'm going to stop now, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thanks everybody. We're now ready for any questions, and I guess I'm interested in that whole question about how do we meet the gap between the benefits of engaging, of being creative, of taking advantage of this natural pattern in our lives where we actually start to want to take creative risks, and the low participation rates that are currently occurring at the moment. So something is obviously missing in what's going on. So I'm interested, I guess, in ideas around that, or other questions perhaps around that as well. But are there any questions on the floor that people are burning to ask? Yes, the lady on the right here.
Good evening, my name's Nadia Weekly, and I realise I've come here with the wrong idea of what this seminar's about, but I hope you'll just indulge me for 2 minutes, because I do want to raise an issue that I think is cognate to this whole area. So I'm a full-time professional author. I'm on the Council of the Australian Society of Authors, so I'm representing myself, not the ASA tonight. I've been a full-time professional author since 1975. That is, I have not had another job. I haven't had a boss putting money into a superannuation fund. My partner is a painter. He's been a full-time visual artist since that time without a job. And what we face is, one of you talked about terrifying age without money, and Margaret did at the end talk about funding. What we're both facing is we want to keep working till we die. We are currently working an 8 to 11 hour day and a 7-hour week, and yet it's increasingly hard. In both of our industries, I believe there's discrimination against the older people. So it's not about having a good job and retiring and doing that pottery course or writing that detective story you never always wanted to write. How is our society treating its elder artists? And just as an example, it's very hard for full-time artists when they turn the requisite age for the age pension actually to get the old age pension, because it's very hard to fill in the forms and to go, I can see someone nodding, and to go through the hoops you have to go through, because you can't just show your birth certificate and the fact that your job as a bus driver or a CEO has ended. And increasingly too, the grant money, and I appreciate that Margaret was talking about community arts funding, and it's different, but there's so much grant money, both private and public, going to emerging artists. And my attitude is, when I was young, I could sleep on the floor and eat lentils. I didn't need all that funding when I was young. Now I'm old, I need it. And when I actually got an Australia Council grant a few years ago, I got kicked off the pension, not for 1 year, but for 2 years. So it was amortised over 2 years. And then that makes it so hard to get back on the pension that even the guy at Centrelink, when I went back in, said, "Welcome back into the labyrinth." So I was hoping, and I realise that you've got really legitimate concerns and they're different from what mine are, but I do want to just raise this issue. I can see someone else nodding, of what happens to people for whom it's a job, not a hobby.
Yeah. I think it's a very valid point, and it's something of, all concerns when there isn't that. You haven't had that asset building stage of your life. It's been because there hasn't been the financial recognition throughout a career to the point where there is the safety net of the superannuation fund. Joanna, is there anything perhaps you might be able to speak to there about some of the, people who have had non-traditional careers, how they are navigating either reconnecting to other workforce or to, I don't know if benefits come into your area or not.
Yeah, I certainly would be interested in talking to you later about exact issues with age pension and Centrelink, because that's something that's useful for us to understand better and whatever. I also agree about what you say about ageism. And there's certainly advice I could give people to say, okay, so you've had a long artistic career, you've developed a whole lot of transportable skills, and there's work you could do to then move into a different field. I don't want to do that because you want to stay in the field that you're in. I've done a lot of work through the Journalists Union and the Entertainment Alliance with journalists who have found themselves in a dying field of print journalism, and I totally understand their rage at being told that maybe they have to retrain for something dull and boring and get a real job, because in neither case is that true. So there's no join the dots answer to this. One thing we do know about people in artistic careers is that sometimes it is easier for them to maintain that career for longer than perhaps nurses or people in finance, which is a very ageist industry. That's not to say that you don't face barriers at all stages of artistic practice. So there's no instant answer, but certainly on the benefits side, I'd love to find out more about why that's so, and if there's anything we can do to advocate to smooth that path for you. I think it's a really important issue for artists, but for other people who've had either non-traditional careers or certainly lower paying careers, and women particularly for the moment at least who don't have superannuation. That's one of our direct concerns at the Commission.
Caitlin. I'm Caitlin from the Australia Council. You raise a really important point about senior artists, and our artist careers study that came out last year had some really interesting data in there about the age of artists being older. We know that artists, the gig economy comes from an arts practice because it's a template for the idea of where work is heading more generally around that uncertainty and around not having those infrastructures in place. So it's something that we're really aware of. I think, the idea of how we support artists to age as they age and over different stages, I think that's something that there's a whole range of conversations that we need to have around that. Just on the emerging artist question, it's one that does come up a lot. So within the Australia Council programs, we don't have any sort of targeted programs for emerging artists. So I think one of the things that we need to be aware of is really kind of being clear about what the parameters are of those programs. But certainly when we're looking at how those programs are impacting on artists, the idea of being kicked off the pension and then having to get on with that's something that we're definitely really keen to have a talk to you about, especially for artists who are, the whole question of artists aging into poverty is something that, is a concern that's been noted in research around the world, and it's something that has been identified as artists age, don't have those resources in place. So I just wanted to really acknowledge what you said, and certainly it's something that we're aware of and looking at in our research, and I'm certainly keen to have a chat to you as well about the specifics of your circumstances.
Because it's when systemic changes in the industry happen at the same time. For example, in the literature industry, there used to be a thing called a backlist, which would support you as your book stayed in print. But publishers have decided it's cheaper not to have a warehouse to keep producing new books, and so my backlist titles from my early career are now out of print and worthless. My artist partner has been with the same gallery since the 70s, and that gallery is closing because its owners are elderly, and he's now 68. How does, what gallery wants to what racehorse owner wants to take on an old racehorse? You want a new one. So ageing is connected or impacted on by systemic industry problems as well.
Did you want to say something, Georgia?
No.
Okay. Other questions? There's a lady at the back.
Yeah, hi there. My name's Amelia over in Art Pharmacy. It's actually a question for Margaret. I'd really like to, if you could give me some great examples of hospitals and amazing art that you've seen in there in programming. And also, what about retirement villages? Is there anything being done in retirement villages? I know it's all over the news at the moment, but it's something, actually, I did something with facts recently. I can see Megan just here in the front here. We did a great photographic exhibition of the art of aging, and it was fascinating, and it really got me attracted to it. So I'm looking into it just on my own personal journey, because I've got an elderly grandmother that was, she's not in a home, but then I sort of thought, well, how can I change retirement? How can I change the stigma of aging in hospitals? And, and I had my children around me in hospital, and I go through there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so depressing. And so anyway, what I'm trying to say is there anything out there, like around the world, that you've seen that is just so amazing that we should be trying to implement here, and if I can help at all?
The development of arts programs in hospitals in Australia has, in the last few years, it's matured quite a lot, and there have been new developments like Artery, which is at the Chris O'Brien facility as part of Prince Alfred. And there are a number of very well established good programs like Blackdown Public Hospital, which is really an example of programs in Australia. One of the best programs I've ever seen is the Laguna Honda Hospital in San Francisco, and this was an old apartment complex that the local authorities took over and developed it as a hospital, aged care, long-term care facility for residents who were low socioeconomic demographic and very multicultural composition. And they converted this Spanish-style building into an extraordinary facility which recreated a community sense. So it was at the forefront of this new consideration with hospitals about creating community spaces and thinking about who's actually living in those spaces and who the staff are that are actually supporting people. So this hospital, for instance, that had small communal dining areas instead of, one big area, and it had a central sort of walkway with beautiful features like a railing on the side of this walkway, which was like they called it the esplanade, but it was beautifully crafted so that people walking down it or sitting down it with a wheelchair could easily traverse. There are a lot of very physical aspects to it that were beautifully executed because the engagement of the local arts community in San Francisco, together with the San Francisco Public Art Collection, was utilised to make people living in that community feel very warm and welcome. And so the artwork, for example, reflected lots of different economic, cultural groups because San Francisco has so many different sort of multicultural areas. I think with aged care facilities, it's a different kettle of fish. So with hospitals, increasingly they're starting to think about patient-centred care. The New South Wales Health Infrastructure, for example, has significant budgets to go towards arts programming. So, for example, at the moment, one of the works we're advising on is Coffs Harbour Extension and Maxville's new hospital. What that's led us to understand is that we again need to go back to accessing professionally trained artists, professionally trained designers of these facilities, and also to consider what the makeup is of the people that are residing. So Maxville and Coffs Harbour, for example, totally different socioeconomic demographics, so the whole approach is quite different, which is of course very pleasing. With aged care facilities, I guess I'm hoping that there will be a big change in this area because aged care as a sector is under significant review now. And certainly there's a real push to go back to this person-centred care. The reality is that a lot of aged care facilities are incredibly depressing and incredibly isolating, and no amount of pictures on the wall is going to change that. So if there's a fantastic organisation in the UK called Ladder to the Moon, and they specialise in training staff, specifically working in aged care facilities. They teach the staff to, when they're getting somebody up in the morning and helping them shower and get dressed, to sing with the patient, for example. Very simple example. But nevertheless, it means that these staff are becoming engaged with the people that they're working with rather than actually doing things for people. And I think one of the real killers for older people is that feeling powerless. And people feel powerless if they don't feel valued. And a lot of staff, particularly in aged care facilities, don't help older people feel valued. Gene Cohen, again, you know, my guru really, he changed in America and subsequently internationally the abiding belief that older people were a burden on society. And what he did when he was running the National Health Services in the US was to change people's thinking into the fact that older people have great potential, older people are an asset. And again, this comes back to the ageism thing, and I'm proud that the Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing has been developing these Macromedia Awards, and the third one will be announced on the 15th of October, which is all about educating media about how to report about activities or landmarks that older people are achieving. So it's not, you know, the 63-year-old grandmother who was on a sort of drug bust. It's more about, instead of being sensational about some of these aspects, it doesn't matter how old the person is. What matters is that she's a grandmother and she's actually introducing drugs to her family, you know. So we've got to change the way the media report older people as much as anything else. And that's in advertising, it's in current affairs, it's in news, it's in health promotion, to reinforce in all of us that getting older is actually an incredibly wonderful period in your life, and how lucky we are to be able to age well in place in our society, and to respect older people, and for younger people to develop that respect, because we are all creatively ageing no matter how old we are.
Question, Joe.
Judith. Yes, Margaret. I just, before I get on to my real question, picking up retirement villages, because you asked about them, and bringing childcare centres and retirement villages together is absolutely the most wonderful thing you can ever do in a retirement village. And bring music into there as well. It's just awesome. And so I would recommend that. We did that, and then we built on that with Grandparents' Day, and building go-karts and using the men's shed to build go-karts, and artists to design them and paint them and then run them down the hill, and the childcare centres. I mean, you just got to do it. It's just, and we're hearing about new models, you know, from Europe about older people taking on lodgers and younger people in their housing and accommodation. We've got to stop this isolation about older people in their homes and stuff like that. But the real question I have is, where are all the men? You know, I'm looking around here and I'm not seeing any.
That is how we feel the rest of the time.
And that really worries me, actually. I'm really worried about that because, you know, I feel, I mean, why is it that men aren't involved in these kinds of discussions whenever I come? And it's always a predominance. I mean, it's an issue, and it's not something that I feel good about. And
so the question is, where's the man on the panel? Why are women dominating this space?
Involved in the same discussions? I don't know what the question.
Well, I think the question, yeah. I'll just say one thing. I mean, I'm here as an arts policy maker, an old one, no longer active. And I predominantly the people involved in that space were women in leadership roles in the arts sector. It's not paid as well as a lot of other jobs, so more women are able to rise to higher heights because it's not paid as well. Women here are possibly practicing artists who may be more concerned about their future because they may not have been able to have the opportunities that men have in the arts. Men still take a lot of the leadership roles in arts, in more profitable areas of the arts. So, for example, the major performing arts companies are mostly run by men. And in the area of community arts and cultural development, there are some fantastic men working as artists within this space, but the people, again, it's a lower paid part of our work, and so therefore it often attracts women. It's a caring profession, it's less about the bells and whistles and shiny bits, and so women do the work. That's my personal view. Vivian, do you have another?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. But I was wondering, because there's probably a pile of program and policymakers in the room, and traditionally, and I've been one of them myself, traditionally we've focused our great attention on Indigenous people, on young people, on women, with special people in Western Sydney, people from socio-disadvantaged groups. We have completely ignored, Milk Crate is it when it comes to a program that specifically looks at older people and perhaps even emerging older artists. How do we start the process of getting these programs up and happening? What are the sort of practical tips for starting that? Now, Margaret's probably got some ideas here, because I know you and I have talked about this kind of thing. How do we embrace an area that's been so overlooked forever?
Malcolm, why don't you're another man in the room.
Yeah, well, I think all the males are at home looking after the kids, probably. I don't know. It's a dilemma. I think that clearly the world is different for a man to a woman, and it's not right, but the men tend to die earlier nowadays than women, so perhaps you're looking after your future in a different way. I guess I think this is a really important topic. I tend to have a slightly more utopian view that we're not going to end up with the 3 stages of life spread across creative expression, that we're going to be a little bit more integrated. And I'd love to see that model of the childcare with the aged care centre and being far more of a community hub. A lot of this is about community, and we've heard with this Royal Commission about a whole lot of horrors, and I suspect tonight's Four Corners will be more horrors about this, and the sense that loneliness and social disadvantage and isolation is going to become bigger social problems than we could ever imagine. And I think that history is a great source of knowledge, but we're into a different history that we're creating now, and we can only borrow a little bit of the history of the past to help us shape the history of tomorrow. I think we are in a time when cities and moving into cosmopolitan spaces are going to continue for at least the next 30 or 40 years, and we need to look at this from a town planning and a whole lot of different perspectives. We can't just look at it solely from the creative industries. It's a social problem that straddles something far greater than just artists. But as I was saying before, we need to do everything we can to chart a course for artists to see a career in working in this space about community engagement in whatever form that might be, whether it's writing or singing or all sorts of different creative outputs. I'd love to see an opportunity for the wisdom of those that have been practicing artists to be passed on more to the mid-career and the emerging artists. I don't think we do that as well as we could, and I'm sure I could bang on for a lot longer with my thoughts, but I'll leave you with that.
I don't have much longer. We do have 2 more questions here. Lady next to Malcolm. That's you.
Thank you. I think I'll stand up because I'm so short. Basically, I'd like to frame this slightly differently. I'd like to say that when we look at older people, we're looking at simply a continuum. What we're not doing is, the notion of separatism is incredibly dangerous. It's useful in a bureaucratic sense. It's not part of life. And we must fight against this separatism. I am so far behind you on this. Constant cross-generational interaction is absolutely essential. We cannot be doing art activities in an aged care facility that doesn't have a meeting point with someone else in the community elsewhere. I ran a small project, a pilot program, a cross-generational pilot program, and in the aged care facility they designed something for the local preschool, and it was done in mosaics. We organised everything to have a double dip, so it worked with one group, but it actually went somewhere else. If you don't have if you have aged care as your focus, you're making a mistake. To me, it's simply about how are we engaging people to be creative, to be engaged and feel that they're valued. Where are the social health determinants, and why aren't we looking at community as our own resource? We don't need extra things from bureaucratic, seminars. What we need is to understand that the growth will have to happen internally from the community if we allow cross-generation. That's all I wanted to say.
Lady in pink, and then are there any actual questions for the panel while we've still got them here, a chance to talk to the experts?
So, Catherine Reiner, Chair of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Ageing, which Margaret is a valued member. This kind of like, this is completely unscripted, but there's kind of, 1, 2, 3. What we've actually been talking about is the areas, and you've mentioned about adults having a gap year. We are all in a generation, and the ones that come behind us will come into a generation where they will be retiring later. Our parents retired at 65, and they retired on Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, and they got the gold watch or the basket of fruit, and out the door they went. We're now living in a different generation where the aged pension will not click in until, doesn't matter what they do at the moment in Canberra, but the idea that it's no longer at 65, it'll be 70, then it'll be 73, because we have the demographic of an ageing population to sustain that, and it cannot be sustained under our existing financial situations. But it comes to the planning of our local communities, and I look at places like Parramatta, and I think to myself, they're planning major communities, Parramatta and west of there, but it's being planned unidimensionally. It's not being planned with the concept of ageing all the way through it. So your community, if you're lucky, you'll be lucky to get a community centre. I've done the retirement village inquiry, and I can give you chapter and verse on that at another time. But what struck me then was this, as you were saying a moment ago, there was this dichotomy in the community that childcare is over here, aged care, whether it's retirement village living, which is state, aged care, which is Commonwealth funded, is over there. So when the planners have got a role to play in knitting all of that together, so then you're developing your communities, your high-rise communities in Parramatta. What I fear is that we're not seeing the integration of all of those services, so that you no longer have the concept of ageing being something that happens out there. And at the MACA we always say we don't talk about people. If you think about somebody between birth and 21, you think about babyhood, childhood, primary school, adolescent, young adult. If you think about somebody between the ages of, say, 70 and 91, same 21 years, but we never talk about the sequential process of ageing, so that there are different stages of ageing and therefore different stages of need. So for me, it rests a lot in trying to convince government about planning and planners understanding that communities actually now are tri or quattro generational. And we have this problem where we don't, and I love the idea about adults taking a gap year. I'd love to introduce that, because A, it allows them to reskill, and B, it gets them to think about what do the next 30 years of my life look like. And none of us ever thought I can only say for myself, when I was in my 50s, or even indeed in my 60s, I never thought, what do the next 30 years of my life look like? So I think, just in that comment about, I love that idea about adults taking a gap year, because I think it's critical given we've got great economic changes coming and great social changes that should be coming.
Thank you. I guess as somebody who runs an arts company who is out there working with the community every single day, and I guess there are a lot of artists who would like to be doing that as a form of income, but also as a form of creative engagement. Where does that fit? We know that creative practice supports well-being. Where does this planning and the infrastructure and the investment allow for the artists to be visible, to be active, to be out there creating programs and experimenting and taking an arts-first approach to some of these issues? Where does that fit into that mix of people with various types of power in that discussion? How can the arts have a place in that discussion that is equally powerful? I guess I'm putting the question back to the community. Catherine, would you like to respond?
I think I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think part of it rests in what Margaret's doing in terms of articulating the importance of creative ageing in terms of social well-being, health well-being, and seeing it integrated into, as the various members have commented on, integrated into health facilities and aged care facilities. But really integrated, not just somebody coming in and playing the piano once a week. So I hear that, and I think that there is, it goes back into questioning our local government organisations and our state government organisations about the way you integrate through the planning. Is not just about the bricks and mortar anymore. It's about it's really about what makes a community and what makes a community hum. And the artistic focus has always been what makes the community hum, not just be the bricks and mortar.
Okay, how are we going for time?
I think we're going to wrap. Just maybe the final.
Yeah, just very quickly, very quick. Great.
Okay, so my father is 70 and I'm 27, so he had me quite late, my mum did. And I'm just wondering, we've talked a lot about what governments can do and councils can do and how legislation can work and community engagement, all that kind of stuff. But for example, someone like me, I'm trying to, the relationship between my father and I has switched a bit, as it usually does as your parents get older. Will you take a bit more of a caretaking role? And I've been wanting to get my father into certain community activities, but I haven't been able to find information about how to do it. So I'm just wondering, where do you see the kind of parent-child relationship going in terms of developing creative skills and things later in life?
Okay, so how can somebody who is older access different skills?
Well, how can an adult child
facilitate? Yeah. I can talk about from how Milk Crate would approach that, but does anybody else on the panel, Georgina or Margaret?
But I think it's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it is a challenge, particularly with men, trying to engage them in this activity. A lot of older men particularly tend to be disinterested in the conventional forms of arts practice, but they love men's shed. Now that gives you a very strong indication of, appealing to men for the things that really enhance their lives. And because of this, the education of people in our society, men get a great sense of achievement when they make something out of wood, for example. I think increasingly it's becoming more equalised because all my granddaughters, you know, are going to end up doing some sort of profession, I'm sure, that's currently male-oriented. But if you take that men's shed as an example, and I don't know where you live, and I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about where you might be able to go locally, but there are some great programs. So Lane Cove Council, for example, has some really excellent programs for men with a
The boomers, the bus outings for older men. I don't know where your father lives, what suburb?
Marriott.
Okay. Some councils are pretty damn good, and Lane Cove's one of them. They recognise that those older men are pretty useless at getting together. They really are. And they actually actively, kind of subtly recruit them to come together once a fortnight to go on these outings and do specific activities. And they've now had to double it. They've got the bus outings for older men and then the bus outings for older men, because there's so many now that they need to break them into two groups. So, look, I mean,
councils have a designated ageing person.
No, they don't.
When they fund this.
Yeah.
Our programs are set up through community groups, but we are focusing on people who've lived experience of homelessness, so it's a different community. Up until a few years ago, we had 75% men in our programs, which reflected what the communities were. I don't think there's an outer barrier for men to participate when they see other men participating, when they see permission, when they're welcomed, when there's a place. So when you see other men doing things, that may be something that he'll be interested in doing. But local councils are useful.
Can I also just mention one thing quickly? One thing that we do know is that the arts organisations like galleries attract membership because of the opportunities to socialise in a non-intimidating way, and that works particularly well for older women, single women, because they feel that they can go to these events. But by the same token, there's a fantastic program in the UK which is specifically run by Newcastle Gallery, which has a program for men whose partners have died primarily through dementia. So they've actually formed the relationships through being a carer of people with dementia. And then when their partner dies, this group of men continue that socialising. So maybe there's an opportunity for arts organisations, visual, performing, whatever, to actually think about their membership activities and what sort of social offerings they can make specifically for men, as well as, you know, general art gallery society type activities.
Yeah, George.
We're doing okay. Just before we wrap up, I was going to say I have a father in an aged care centre, and I wonder as we enter this Royal Commission, which is probably going to be gruelling and horrendous, maybe one of the great things that could come out of it, and particularly create work for artists of all ages, perhaps even with writing workshops for the Nadia Wheatleys of the world and arts projects for her husband and the like. Maybe one of the outcomes of this Royal Commission, if we all lobby hard enough, could be a much more professionalised service of arts activities, because if any of you have contact with aged care centres, often the creative little concert that they have is often of a very sort of low standard. If we could get a register of professional artists who actually have a modicum of training in how to present specifically to aged care centres, it could be one good thing. I just want to thank everybody for coming, and particularly Judith, Georgina, Joanna and Margaret for doing such a great job tonight. We've got a few more minutes before we vacate the room, but feel free just to stay and have a little drink. But thank you very much for all coming.